And welcome to the Bearded Truth. I'm your host, Jenn Beard. I am with my brother, Jacob Beard.
Hello.
Hi, Jake.
How's it going?
Um, it's going pretty good. Jacob has his master's in mechanical engineering and a heavy focus on robotics, control theory, and artificial intelligence. He worked in the robotics industry for over 2 years, programming systems to work with robots as well as the robots themselves. So, Jacob, you are a perfect fit out of the Beard siblings for this conversation tonight.
Sure.
And we both just watched the documentary called Killer Robots on Netflix. It's an unfortunate name for a serious topic. Yeah.
It is. And to be honest, when you first told me about this documentary, I'm naturally a bit of a skeptic for one, but two, I kind of like scoffed a bit because I thought this documentary was going to be on like how robots are going to rule the world. Because I mean, you know how you always get those small talk questions about like if a person's like really tall, they'll be always like, oh, how's the weather up there? You get that same small talk question every time. Well, when I tell people I worked with robotics, the small talk question I would always get would be, oh, so when are robots going to rule the world, or are you programming the robots to kill us all? And because that's just like the common like Hollywood movie knee-jerk reaction people have when they hear about robots and the threat of AI. So I sincerely thought that this whole documentary was going to be on that, like a very Hollywood. And I understand that there are some very smart individuals that do see like the threat of like a catastrophic AI takeover, approach. I don't really have that mindset of it.
Hmm.
So I kind of thought that this documentary is going to be that perspective, but in just a very, very Hollywood focused, not even somebody like, I don't know, like a Lex Friedman talking about how he thinks AI might take over the world kind of thing, but like a Hollywood perspective of that. So I went into that documentary very skeptical. And even how the documentary started, I was like, oh boy, here we go,
Yeah, it was a little
and
ominous.
they had a lot of B-roll that was very just Hollywood-esque, of Terminator vibe kind of, and then you see this like one B-roll shot of them going deleting a 0 and adding a 1,
Yeah.
and it's like dun, 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 and you're like, okay, here we go. But the documentary was honestly surprising and informative of what they did showcase
Hmm.
and the perspective they took on the development of AI, which was very pertinent to today's ongoings of advancements in artificial intelligence and robotics. So I
Mm-hmm.
appreciated the documentary a lot.
Yeah, it seemed like they had a good mix of people from the US Navy, from military, who were involved in robotics, engineering for military use, for like the military industrial complex.
Right.
And they had really good reasons. And I want to talk about that because I thought I'll just say, like, my takeaway from watching their perspective and what they're developing and why they're developing it is that we have to, because it's the new arms race
Right.
globally,
Right.
for like the war front and for like, the leading nations. And so if China's developing it, Russia's developing
Right.
robotics, America has to. It's not a question of, because then I was thinking, like, well, what are the ethical consequences, which are still questions on the table.
Yep.
But like the fact that we absolutely have to develop these things, or else we are in the dark age and we're not even going to be able to like protect or defend ourselves as a country.
Right.
So that was my initial takeaway after listening to them. But in addition to military experts, we had scientists, even in the field of biology, who were working with AI, and we had a bunch of experts that were giving voice to these things on the documentary. So I think it was just a super eye-opening, healthy, well-rounded perspective of where all of this is headed, and from each field having their input. And so I definitely had questions that I took away from all of this.
Sure. Yeah.
And one of the main questions I wanted to ask you was like, how quickly is all this developing? Because this documentary was released in 2023. And of course, they showed the use of drones and the biological capability of AI to create new proteins for biological warfare, which was an extreme point that I had never even considered before the documentary. And this documentary came out in 2023. So where do you my question is, where are we with robotics
Mm.
like today, right now, with military and sorry, keep going.
Right. I mean, for one, I think we have to understand the first caveat here to that question is that we will actually never know the highest advancements in military grade technology because that
Mm.
is all classified. So wherever you think we are, we're probably many steps ahead of that. So that on the surface level, I in terms of our military technology with it, another thing to understand is that what you see in terms of robotics and military combat right now, we have to kind of separate between if you want to talk about robotics versus artificial intelligence, right? And those are two different concepts entirely. So what we see right now in military combat, I don't think is a lot of artificial intelligence. So like the drone strikes and everything, like
Hmm.
for one, like the America has the principle that they have to have a human decision when executing a life, right?
Right.
So we know that we have human operators behind any robot that's applying military actions upon individuals in combat. So we know that's happening for one. So then it's the question of, okay, our drones are piloted by actual pilots, but then or the combat drones that are firing upon individuals. But then you do have, as we saw even in that documentary, the drones that are exploring, right? The exploratory drones.
Hmm.
Now that is a lot more applicable and certainly um, above our capability right now to deploy drones in terms of exploration. So um so
You do you
yeah.
mean like just for the individual civilian or like military and police? Like those are different categories.
Well, okay. So for the individual civilian, I yes, you could make artificial intelligence yourself as an individual to pilot a drone for exploration, but I think that drone is going to be, I mean, very limited for what an individual could program a
Well,
drone.
no, I meant like legally, like where, I thought you meant like no one is allowed to use them for exploratory measures yet.
No, no. Exploratory measures is currently being used
Okay.
in military. And what's not allowed is the means of lethal force
Hmm.
in autonomy for Americans.
At
Um,
least that we are aware of as the general
sh-
public.
sure. Um, so and again, this is what I'm saying is when it comes to military expertise in AI and robotics, we don't fully know. We will never know, actually. And even if you did know, you couldn't talk about this. So there's always going to be a bit of a question mark as to how advanced we are. But what it seems like to me is that we still use a lot of pilots in robots in warfare. So now, obviously, there's still a lot of capability you have with that, but it does mean that you have to have a person to every robot that's deployed in the field,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the limiting factor. So you might in this documentary too, you had those robots with like armed cannons on them, not just drones, but just actual mobile robots on the ground
Yeah.
that had weaponry attached to them. But I do not believe that these would be autonomous. And even if they are, they're probably very limited in their autonomy. And most likely, what you're seeing when you see those robots with weaponry on them are piloted somewhere
Mm,
by some person. So I think just starting off, we need to like definitely separate the two ideas of robotics and artificial intelligence, right?
absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
and so yeah, in one aspect, we have incredible robotics, right? I mean, if you just take a drone strike, like that is an incredible force. Um, but when you take such an incredible force like a drone and then you pair it with AI, you open up a lot of other avenues.
Hmm.
So, whereas again, you needed an experienced pilot piloting this drone to make important actions and potentially lethal actions. And then if you take that and you go a step further, now you have this powerful weaponry that can be done and perform its all of its functions artificially. Uh, Now, what's your limiting factor? Your limiting factor is no longer personnel, but your limiting factor are is really just resources, like material resources, right? And
Mm.
manufacturing. So whereas because truly your limiting factor beforehand was getting experienced people, and that takes a long time to train people up to be able to pilot drones and such. So to answer your initial question of like where we're at, I think what you see in that video a lot, in that documentary and other videos and news, etc., is a lot of very impressive robotics, but I don't think our artificial intelligence is there yet. I think we're in that phase of pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
But when you go and you see like these crazy robots, what some videos will do too is, in one case they'll show you this robot that's being piloted, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's a really impressive piece of technology, and look what it's doing. You don't know that it's being piloted, right? You just see it as being very impressive. And then they'll move from that to this artificial, or this robot with artificial intelligence, and they'll try to make you think that it's comparable, and it's not, right?
Yeah, but I also think like they were trying to show like the future of where it's potentially going with being
Sure.
powered by AI.
Right.
And I honestly, I mean, the problem is kind of is a mutual problem, whether it's piloted by AI or by a human person, because as we know, like human people are flawed. And so,
Sure.
there's still going to be that moral dilemma with a human person piloting something and taking out a number of lives that they shouldn't, or targeting a certain group of people, or that's outside
Absolutely.
of the scope of just warfare. So, I mean, that still poses, major concern. And
Absolutely. But I think the difference being in that, who is to blame if artificial intelligence executes and kills an
one,
individual?
right. Yeah, that was one of my main questions that I had actually from watching it, because I think there would be, Jake, like some group or authority that's, over the military complex that, controls the robots or built the robots or the drones or whatever it is. Like some human group or person has to be legally responsible, morally responsible for these systems, So I mean, because even I mean that I can see that being more complicated, because
Yep. Very much is.
if yeah, I'm actually like thinking through this as I'm speaking, because if AI is autonomous, like they say it will be, and it chooses between a civilian target and a combatant, and it can't really distinguish, or maybe it can, or and you're like, well, do you take the person who built it to court? Do you take like the
Right.
whole company? Like, what is, well, they built it 20 years ago. Now what? It's like I
Correct.
don't know. It really gets into some murky moral waters, and
It absolutely does. This is very complicated and convoluted on who would be to blame. I mean, personally, I mean, if a pilot takes out, pilot that's piloting a drone right now takes out a civilian instead of a combatant, who is to blame right now? I don't even see that happening in today's world.
mm,
I mean, America does a lot of drone strikes, and I know we've, you know, targeted innocent civilians in that. And then I've never seen reports of saying, oh, this drone pilot was sentenced because he killed civilians in
Mm,
warfare.
mm.
So I already don't know. And then it gets even more complicated when you take artificial intelligence behind, because two, it's not going to be one person developing artificial intelligence. It's going to be a lot of individuals working together to design this artificial intelligence. So yeah, it's never just going to be one person. And then again, when you take out that limiting factor, you could have 10,000 drones out there firing on people.
Yeah.
And and how do you even quantify the targets that you hit and didn't hit? So uh, it
Yeah,
this
and then
ex-
who's fighting that or combating that issue? Like, will police have drone capability? Like, who's gonna harness that and put it back into its proper sphere? If something goes awry and you can't control it, and it's like, you know,
right, right. I think it does divulge into um i- into like a branching issue here, because not only do you have, like you're pointing out, not only do you have the military to consider, well, okay, police will certainly begin to start using this, and then the way technology works, it ends up, you know going to the hands of civilians as well. So and then, like, for instance, personally, I could go out, buy one of those robot dogs, which they're marketable, right?
mm-hmm.
By Boston Dynamics or whoever, whatever other company. I could go out, buy a Boston Dynamics dog, and I could put weaponry on that dog. And I could personally program artificial intelligence to use that weapon system. I, that is in my means.
And it's
As
moving like this,
yeah,
falling
would
over.
it would it be so? And look, those robot dogs from Boston Dynamics are surprisingly effective
Are they?
at mobility. Yes, yes. That video, I don't know what robot was being used in that video for the
The one that was on the runner's track?
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know what company sold that dog,
I can find out.
or if it was like an early stage of Boston Dynamics, but currently Boston Dynamics spot robots are incredibly dynamic,
Mm,
and at the uh, ground that they can traverse and the obstacles they can overcome. So basically what I'm saying is this is already accessible to civilians,
mm.
to just random people. So yeah, that it does branch into a lot of different factors. And I think if we're still on the conversation of ethics, the other thing to consider here is that we're talking about how to make this most ethical. Like, when we talk about, so my example of what I could do right now, right, with artificial intelligence is capable because I'm not worried about precision. Um, so if I'm talking about, like, let's just say some random person out there that wants to do a terrible act could mount weaponry on top of a robot and use it for destructive purposes, because that person, that individual, is not concerned about precision. That individual just wants to cause destructive acts,
Mhm.
right? And it's a lot easier to do that than it is to take very precise, accurate, and detailed decisions. So, because if we do allow artificial intelligence to use deadly forces, we
Mhm.
want the success rate to be 99.999%, right? You want as close to 100% accuracy as you can possibly get. You don't want room for error. Another instance is, why is it that self-driving cars aren't currently being used in everyday life?
Yeah, talk about a lot of issues with this.
Because you need 99.9999% before population is going to be willing to accept it. Right now, those cars can drive at 99% accuracy, which is, you think, well, 99% accuracy is good. Is it? If you drive 100 times to the grocery store. Do you want one of those times to be a failure?
Is
No.
it really that close with precision?
Yeah, absolutely. But
Mm,
again, you don't want just 99%. You want higher than 99%.
mm,
Because again, if you drive to the grocery store 100 times in a year, you're probably going to drive more, but if you drive 100 times and you only have 99% accuracy, one of those times is going to cause a failure to
mm.
whatever degree, right? Maybe you hit a curb, maybe you hit a trash can, but what if you hit a pedestrian? If you got in your car and you knew that 1 in 100 times you'd hit a pedestrian, you'd never get in that car. So it really demands for such a high precision when you talk about AI involved in robotics in terms of uh, vehicles, self-driving, or very specifically military. However, this is the caveat I wanted to make here. This is us who are very concerned with ethics. Put this into the hands of another government or agency that does not care about ethics.
Right.
What if they only care about 50% accuracy, right?
Mhm.
In terms of the target they're trying to hit versus the target they don't care if they don't hit, right? Then you get into very dangerous waters of, well, now the enemy is using robots that are just shooting everybody. They don't care about who they hit and who they don't hit, right? Their
Yeah,
accuracy is now not even on hitting a certain target, a certain military combatant. Their accuracy is, they've changed the game. They just want to hit targets.
right.
Well, now we're in serious trouble.
So do you think there's countries that already have that capability and are capable of deploying those kinds of things? And
No,
no.
no, I don't. I if there are countries that could deploy that,
Mhm.
other than the US, they wouldn't. They aren't countries that would.
Right. Like
So
Japan, for example.
I think even China, like I don't think China would deploy a robot with its number one goal of just hitting targets. That is like very radical, very terroristic, like
Mhm.
types of
Mhm.
ideas. China would also look for a high percentage accuracy of targeting. Um, um, now once we get into the gray waters of, okay, what percentage is acceptable and what isn't, and that gets very very murky very quickly, and China might have less percentage accuracy of desired than America might have. I don't know.
Mhm.
And I think from individual to individual that'll also change.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like the use of robotics in the military, and like I was watching the drone fly around, and I kind of chuckled to myself because it was like exploring the building,
Sure,
mapping
yeah.
it out before the soldiers went in, and taking out or marking like areas that were dangerous with explosives or whatnot. And I was like, what if the robot was much smaller, more capable, more precise with flying, like a bird or a bee or something like that, and they were much smaller and easier,
Mhm.
like
Sure.
faster with navigating. Like, where are we with developing stuff like that? Because the drone that I saw in the video has probably been like, is gone the way of the dinosaur at this point. That's what I would assume,
Honestly,
because
I
civilians are flying those things right now.
well, okay.
Bob
So
down the street has one.
So again, what you saw in that video though was actually more impressive than half the robotics I see.
Wait, are you
Because
serious?
yes, because that drone that you see in that video
Mm.
is completely AI. So it uses SLAM, right, which is simultaneous localization and mapping, which is very complex to do. It's using probably multiple different um, path planning algorithms, global and local path planning algorithms, very, very difficult to do. And then on top of all that, it probably has some type of reinforcement learning. So it's learning as it's going.
Oh wow.
And it's that's it's not that, and again, this is what I try to separate between, between just robotics in general and artificial intelligence compared
Mm-hmm.
with robotics. Because yes, like you said, Joe Blow down the street could have that same drone piloting it, but he has to pilot it. And this is where it really separates the two. And that, now take that drone and put 10,000 in a city.
Oh wow.
Right. Right. So instead of just mapping this one little house and this slow moving vehicle, now you have 10,000 swarming a city, mapping all the individuals, all the people, all the weaponry, etc. It becomes very powerful very quickly, because what you lacked
Shoot.
in capability of the robotics, you make up for in the capability of the artificial intelligence.
Talk about really easy for like finding and tracking people too.
uh, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Because and that's kind of the idea of swarm technology too, is that you have a lot of redundancy built in. So sure, maybe those robots are so clunky that you shoot down 10 of them, right? But if your swarm technology is effective enough in artificial intelligence, you have 1,000 of them. So yeah, you shot down 10, but you were nowhere near to destroying the swarm of bees that's tracking the individuals or targets, right?
Right. And bees is an interesting segue because they are apparently studying the behavior and the communication patterns of bees, and they want to implement that and animal behavior too, combining it into robotics.
Bees are shaping the future of AI brain biomimicry. A bee brain has around 1 million neurons, whereas a human brain has 86 billion. And yet bees are actually faster and more accurate decision makers than humans in situations that involve quick, nuanced risk assessment. So scientists are modeling the future of computational decision making on the brain of a bee. By tracking the brain circuitry of bees, they can reverse engineer aspects of a bee's cognition to create computer chips that control robots for applications that require adaptability, speed, and accuracy.
So I found a group. I believe they're located in Europe. They have a lot of grants and they've been studying this and mapping this because they want to integrate animal behavior into robotics. And I thought that was really kind of a little eerie and interesting all at the same time because, like you said, these drones they're kind of like flying in what we would like identify as like a flock
Yep.
or a swarm. And if they're able to not only like grow in their knowledge and adapt, but what if they're also able to communicate in a way
They
that's
should.
animalistic, so then you've just upped the ability for like hunting techniques, identifying targets at just a much quicker and more accurate rate. But it's really 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 fascinating. And I AI was one thing, but then to combine like this capability of AI, which we don't even know the full extent of, with the capability of nature, with animalistic behavior and all the strengths of nature, whether it's bees or particular falcons or birds or whatever it is. In this particular group, I believe it's called Opteron.
Yep.
They are specifically focusing on insects, which I found really interesting, the behavior and the capabilities of insects and integrating that into robotics. And I was kind of blown away because I didn't realize how extensive all of this research already was, and that it's well underway. And like you said, there's no way for us to really know the full extent of it or where they are currently on the map with designing these things. But yeah, the question in my head was like, how small can you get these drones? How capable when they're moving as a group? Um,
Yeah.
how
I um so I think a couple things there. So talking about the robotic developments, and again the artificial intelligence advancements. So for the artificial intelligence swarm technology, even when I was in school, like I developed some swarm technology, for my robots that I designed. And this is a very common technique when you deal with multiple robots working together to work towards a certain goal. So if you just like Google like different algorithms or swarm technology algorithms or etc., right? There's ant colony optimization, ACO. It uses pheromones to guide swarm agents. There's particle swarm optimization. This is like basically birds flocking together or a school of fish. And it's kind of like you take basically little like particles, or your robots as particles, and you kind of morph the position of where you're going based on the environment that you're interacting with.
Oh, wow.
Um, so there's a lot of those algorithms, and they do mimic animalistic behavior in their intelligence.
Mm.
Now, I'm aware of those different swarm patterns. I'm not necessarily aware of other maybe artificial intelligence that they've come up with to mimic insects, like in a micro level of like one robot in the group. Maybe it's performing some um, intelligence that mimics animal behavior. I'm not necessarily aware of that, but swarm technology is very much used and applied in a lot, specifically of drones, but it could be AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, that are on the floor, or you know, robots like that.
So when you
So
say autonomous mobile robots, like they're functioning completely, solely independently, like on their
correct,
own? Mm.
correct, yeah, and then usually specifically with swarm technology combined with that, yes.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, and like you also said, it is typical that they would share knowledge together. So this
Mm.
robot's saying this robot's saying this robot's saying this, right? And because they're saying different things, depending on the goal of the swarm, maybe your goal is to reach Starbucks. And this robot's saying a McDonald's, that robot's saying a Walmart, but the moment one robot would pick up Starbucks on the end of the swarm, then the whole swarm relocates based on that detection. So the idea is not just redundancy in your swarm, but the focus, the focus of the neural network, or the focus of the reinforcement learning, what its goal is, with the tremendous amount of data that the entire swarm is collecting with all of its lasers
That's
and
just insane. Like
cameras.
I mean, this is just an imaginative process for us. We're theorizing like what will happen or what it'll look like, when it's actually implemented into like everyday life with people. And I think there's really good uses for it, like search
Sure.
and rescues, and for military operations, police operations. Like I can see it being used in anti-human trafficking, like what we're trying to
Hmm.
do with Homeland Security right now, and ICE, and going and targeting the drug cartel that are here in the United States. Like I could see drones and robotics being used to
Sure.
help in those procedures and those activities, which is awesome to think about. But on the flip side of it, it's like it all depends on who's behind it and what it's being used for, like with anything.
Right, and that's precisely right. And I think if we're rediscussing the issue of ethics and such, what I like to kind of come back to is if you go to more primitive days of people with swords or bows and arrows, right? You only had so much capability of both good and evil you could do with that tool, right? There's only so much destruction you could do with the bow and arrow, right? um and you're very limited. But as you advance in technology, it's a tool, and the power increases, the power of what you can do. And when you go from the bow and arrow to the musket, right, to the revolver, to the Gatling gun, to missiles, the destructive power is increasing. And now that we're getting into robotics, I think one tool that robots present to people is the ability to take actions without repercussions. And any of the other
Mm-hmm.
tools, there's always a user that's using this tool.
Mm-hmm.
But now that you include robotics, you can have destructive forces without any repercussions for that individual, right?
Yeah.
Like for the bow and arrow, you're going up in combat and your life is on the line. Yeah, you have a tool, but that person could die using that tool. Now there it's completely um, unassociated with
Right.
repercussions. And then you have the multiplication of this, where now it's not just and again, this is including AI, because robotics, you could have that disassociation with repercussions, right? And using destructive power in a remote location. But now you have the multiplication of artificial intelligence. So not
Hmm.
only do you have that disassociation, now you have the multiplication of that. So multiplication of destructive power. So again, you have a swarm that's goal is for destruction, and you have a lot of robots, attempting to blow up a place or whatever it is. And it's yeah it's it peels back this even more to say, okay, like you said, there's a lot of good that you could have for search and rescue and everything, but like with anything, this is a tool, and it's just increasing the amount
Yeah.
of power, and that power can be used for a lot of good but also a lot of destruction. And um I think with the way technology has always gone, we will continue on this path, because
Hmm.
as much red flags as people throw here and there, and like, should we not, all of that, I
Hmm.
have never seen a time in history where we've said, okay, we're going to stop advancing technology. Doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't see any way around it. I don't think there's any stopping it, which is kind of interesting that you said that, because the um the CEO of Collaboration Pharmaceuticals, who was shown in the documentary, his name was Sean Ekins, or Ekins, Ekins. He basically was saying, when we were playing around with AI to see if we could generate all these bad new molecules, to generate new toxins that we've never known about before for like biological warfare, and start generating all of these things overnight, thousands upon thousands, they said tens of thousands were generated by AI. He's like, we opened a Pandora's box and we just need to stop. He's like, we just shut it down. And immediately I was like, yeah, because you are supposedly a good man who's thinking, who has a moral compass and who cares. But anybody, and he even said this, anybody can use this. I was like, well, thank you for sharing this with everybody.
Right. Right. Yeah.
This little guy in the foreign country is like, pushes up his glasses. It's like creating
Yeah.
bioweapons. That was really terrifying. So yeah, and I agree with you to your point. Like, there is no putting it back in the box. There's no stopping it. We're moving forward. And now it's like this arms race, like I said before, like every country, just to have the capability of it, to say you have it. And
Right.
yeah, and I think there are a lot of good red flags that have been raised and theories about where this could potentially go. But again, like you said, it's going to continue down this route. They're going to continue developing it. We kind of have to at this point. But I also, this is my personal theory. I think that as like technology develops to the point where we just like swarms of drones that are animalistic, and AI, run drones that are autonomous, and they're like the new police state. When we get to that point in time where, and I think the while technology increases, the morality of culture is decreasing. And that's just what I already see. And I have a lot of hope for, you know, kind of like William Wilberforce said, the reformation of manners in society through the church. Like, that's what we're called to do. And I see you know that taking place, even in American culture. I don't know about everywhere else, but I think that will happen.
Sure.
But at a particular juncture in time, you know, I think it's just going to be, you're going to have this really interesting combination of moral depravity,
Yeah.
decline of morality, and then an incline of technology and
Right.
robotics and AI. And that's going to start running things and managing things. And who cares if at that point people are going to say, like, so many autonomous robots killed so many civilians. Civilians are just in the way, because I was already discussing this with John. We have such a small view of the value of humanity. And it starts, with from natural birth, natural, with the conception of a person until the time of natural death. Like the Catholic Church views human life as sacred, and we're losing that not, I can't even just say the perception of what that is, but the truth, the moral truth of the reality of the worth and value of a human,
Yep.
made in the image and likeness of God. And so as we lose that, and then we are gaining all this other technology, like people are gonna be like, is screw it with ethics, we're not gonna really care. And it's developing at such a fast rate. And and so this particular gentleman, Sean Ekins, that I mentioned before, he said that this capability of AI is a dual-edged sword, but so it can be used for good, it can be used for evil, and he said
Yep.
at the flip of a switch, it could be used for something lethal, as we discussed. And so he
Right.
partnered with a laboratory in the documentary called Spies Laboratory. I believe that's how you pronounce it, SPIEZ. And like I said before, they were mapping out, they just used AI to see if AI could uh, find all these new molecules, to create new toxins, whether they're neural toxins or whatever, to be used. And they just wanted to see what it was capable of. And so they flipped that switch, and they found out that overnight the AI had generated thousands of molecules, they said, with the click of a button. And they went through the list, and these are biologists, they said some of these are new to them, you know. And so the AI, you know, model that they used was able to do that. And they said even find something more lethal than VX, which is that asphyxiation toxin that they use
Right.
sometimes for.
And I think VX was in that list too, right? Of it, it generated VX. So it was like,
Mm,
okay, so you did generate a very known lethal toxin, like confirmed you did that, and then you generated other ones on top of that, potentially
yeah,
more lethal than that.
yeah. And so, and I agree with him. It was a Pandora's box. And so I'm actually going to link some articles from Sean Ekins, and he works with a lot of other scientists. And I think they presented to, it was either the White House or Congress, their findings. And so the question is, like, how easy is this to do? Has someone already done it and we're not aware of it? Like, what is this opening for the world of, biological warfare? How dangerous is this? Like, how widely can it be used in a targeted location? I mean, it was frightening. And so basically they were also saying like AI could find a particular protein structure within a known toxin. They talked about this article that I have, is called "There's a Chat GPT. Is there a Chat GPT for biology? What could possibly go wrong?" And so they talked about the plant protein toxin ricin, and they said ricin can inactivate ribosomes, the cellular structures that resemble proteins. In other words, it's a dangerous poison. A protein engineering AI could, say, redesign the protein structure around ricin's active site, potentially removing any sequence similarity to ricin. Anyone working on toxin detection technologies, biodefense or food security labs, for example, might find it difficult to identify new unseen toxins. Established systems to detect and prevent the illegal export of toxins would not recognize them, which is crazy. So you could basically pass this undetected, and because it basically what the AI did is like kind of restructured it to make it undetectable and possibly
Mm,
even more lethal. And that's just with one. And so the article goes on, and I'm gonna post a link to it because I thought it was really really interesting. Um, and so it just kind of opens up all of this for me, so many
right.
questions of like, where is this going? How fast is this developing? Is
Yeah.
our own Congress passing legislation to try to have like ethical frameworks for, you know, um, preventing the misuse or abuse of this kind of technology? You know?
Right. I think I never let my mind wander to, think about the potentials of artificial intelligence and the realm of biology, I don't know why. It seems obvious now in hindsight, but certainly never in the realm of like chemical warfare,
Mm-hmm.
of what you could discover and invent using artificial intelligence. Yeah, it, it again, as I said before, I am a skeptic. So when I saw that it was just one kid in a university that made this script or program that performed this functionality, I think even still I'm a little skeptical, because it wasn't like a team of developers that worked on this for years and years to develop this software that was capable of discovering new toxins. But the professor seemed pretty convinced that the program was developing new toxins, and maybe I would imagine the program absolutely spit out a lot of stupid things that would never work.
Mm.
But the fact that it still could develop new toxins, yeah, it does open up a very frightening world, and especially when you come to chemicals, because it's a lot more limiting on how you can restrict that. But again, it's like we also discussed, this world is constantly advancing, these technology, somebody is eventually going to use that, right,
Mm-hmm.
for ill
Mm-hmm.
purposes. So what do we have to do now in this new world? We have to use that software to detect the chemicals that are coming through, right?
Yeah.
So because they're using the software to make chemicals undetectable, now we have to use this software to try to find
Mm-hmm.
undetectable chemicals and make them detectable, right? So, oh, we don't know of this chemical before, but because we have the software, we're going to take this chemical compound, we're going to run it through the software, and we're going to determine how toxin does the software think it is,
Right.
right? So you definitely have to think preventatively. You can't just hide this technology and hope nobody else ever sees it. You kind of have to take it and use it defensively or proactively. But yeah, and how proactive is our government in these things? I don't know, but this is such a diverse world, and there's so many complications that come with it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, detecting toxins in an airport is one thing, right?
Right.
But what are all the other use cases for this? I mean, it's a lot. It's a
It is
lot.
a lot, and that's kind of it was a little overwhelming, like, the more you think about it, because then it starts, like, unfolding more and more, and you have more questions, and you're like, "Well, then what are we doing right now to put things in place for safety precautions and
Right.
to protect people?"
Right.
And it's like, but I also realize, like, how much money is involved in all of this too,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
this always seems to be a priority. So, I know that, you know, I would assume that the companies that are creating these things and off branches of the military who are creating these things, like, the government is going to support that in any way they can, because they realize it's an arms race and they want them to
Right.
be productive. And they're not thinking
Right.
about necessarily the ethical issues with all of this. There's probably very
Sure.
few people who are even concerned about that, you know, besides the
Right.
average person down the street. That, that's the other thing too. Like, I'm thinking about, like, the right to bear arms and our rights as citizens, of the United States, to be able to defend ourselves, our property, our
Yeah.
homestead, all
Sure.
those things. That's a natural right to be able to defend your life and your property and your loved ones. So how are we even going to be capable in the future of defending ourselves? Really, like, I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious.
I think there's always that factor when it comes to advancements of military technology, of where is the limit for right to bear arms and where is too much, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And there, I personally don't even know where I sit on this, on where that line is. But there are people that advocate for civilians to own tanks, for civilians to own aircraft. For it's like, well, obviously my line definitely is crossed at nuclear atomic bombs. Like, okay,
That's good to
let's
know.
let's pull let's pull it back. Let's pull it back. But where is that line? Like, that's an extreme, but
Hmm.
there is a line, right?
Sure,
But
sure.
where does that line persist? And I think civilians owning tanks seems a bit extreme to me,
Okay,
right?
well, yes, understandable. But my thought is, if you get to the point where you have autonomous robots that could potentially attack,
Right?
say they miss target a civilian as someone who needs to
Sure,
be taken out, right?
sure.
And they are coming after a person to kill a person. Well, you should be able to defend yourself if you can against something of that type of threat. And how would you even do that? Would a firearm be good enough?
So, but
I don't know.
uh, you know, I think eventually it won't be. I'll tell you that
Mm,
much, because
yeah,
eventually the armor for the robotics is so strong, you need armor piercing rounds to be able
right.
to destroy the electronics inside of the robot. And no, I mean, civilians don't just have armor piercing rounds, and that's yeah, it's and
Is there, okay, this is just me asking because I'm not obviously a robotics person at all, but is there something you can like use that could like fry the internal system of a robot, or like confuse the system, scramble the system? Like, is there anything like that?
I mean, I think what you're referring to is probably like some type of EMP, right? um but obviously, yes, an EMP would work, some localized EMP. But I think that's almost harder to acquire than armor piercing rounds.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so
Mm.
I mean, maybe I don't know, but maybe you could construct some sort of Faraday cage too that could do it, right? Where the communications would be so scrambled, um,
Oh,
but
I see. Okay, like you're saying, like have your home covered with something like that, where that's just I can't even imagine. I can't even
right.
think of that.
It's
But
it's
yeah,
I don't think
okay.
anything is really. I mean, I think your best solution would be armor piercing rounds,
Hmm.
but that obviously, yeah, is not really. I don't even think are armor piercing rounds accessible to the population. I'm not sure.
I
Um,
I wish I knew. I don't know.
so whether they are or aren't, I
Yeah,
think
we'll find out.
sure. I think yeah, it's and then even if you could destroy one robot or whatever, civilians don't have their own robots to do the same fighting. So
Hmm.
you're definitely at on the back foot already. So,
Yeah, and that's true. Jacob, we have to find a solution for the war with the robots that's coming.
but I mean,
I'm trying to equip people.
it's comical, but it's a comical thought, but it's also, to what you were saying earlier, honestly, very probabilistic of happening eventually, right?
Hmm.
As the degradation of morality persists and continues, that possibility continues to increase,
Right.
right? So I'm hopeful and a bit optimistic that the current nation's morality will actually find itself again, and that we'll
Hmm.
have a time where morality is reintroduced um and just grounded again. But even if that does happen, which I'm hopeful will, that doesn't mean at all, and it probably means the opposite, that eventually we will lose that again.
Hmm.
And if we swing one way, it's very possible it swings the other way, and then we go into a time of moral depravity, right? And then the only thing that people have in terms of upholding um the law and upholding morality is for the sake of society, right? So
Hmm.
if you say, why shouldn't you kill a person, well, society would be deconstructed at that point, right? So I don't kill people and other people shouldn't kill people because we need to have a functioning society. Is that your total moral premise? right? So that society functions. What happens when your needs are higher than the other person's needs, right? What happens when the government, local, state, federal, I don't care, what happens when that government or in other countries, doesn't have to be America, decides that my need is greater than the civilians' need. The need for the civilians just to do their job and get in their homes is
Right.
higher, right? When that utilitarian switch hits,
Right.
and the whole need for society, right, is your only moral premise, well, hey, that might work on an individual to individual level. It does not work from government to individuals, right? When the ruling body decides that the the people needs to just perform its actions and get home, and
Yeah.
they to start declaring martial law and what you can and can't do, because for the betterment of society, where in the end it's probably just the betterment for the ruling class, whatever it is,
Hmm.
then you lose, because the amount of power that they have, and you get into this police state. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
like, okay,
Hmm.
already it's possible of happening. I understand that. Like, already the military is comprised of some extremely advanced technology, right? The only thing that the population has is the population, right? There's so many people that it may be hard to control, right? And yeah, the firepower between the government, the U.S. government, and the U.S. people is very low, like, or sorry, very
Hmm.
stark. Um, we have a very low amount of firepower. The U.S. government has a very high amount of firepower. The one limiting factor is numbers, right?
Which may not be an issue in the future because the population may be much smaller, you
Well,
know.
but even whether it is or isn't, the idea of artificial intelligence eliminates that,
Mm.
right? If you can have one drone for every person in your country, and one drone that has capable of lethal force, then
Hmm.
you completely rule out population as a factor.
Yeah.
And now you absolutely lose. So if you have a tyrannical government that is completely lacking in morality, the only reason
Hmm.
it has "thou shalt not kill" is for the sake of society, or for society not to be deconstructed, and that will obviously fall through if a tyrannical government is in place, because their needs will be superseding the needs of the people. Then what do you have to defend yourself? Oh, you have weaponry. Okay, well, guess what? That doesn't come to consideration when you're fighting robots, because if it's people versus robots, yeah, yeah, it's over.
Yeah, and I do think there will be a point in time where that does happen. How far into the future that is, I have no idea. But as far as that utilitarian mindset of like the slave, the working man, and these classes and tiers of people within a tyrannical government, that exists. It's existed in the past. History repeats
Sure.
itself. It exists currently. North
Right.
Korea, you could even argue communist China
Yep.
and other places in the world. And like um America has only been so many steps away from that. The American people have just been sleeping. We've been slumbering, and like I have a lot of friends from Cuba who've been trying to wake a lot of their American friends up, say, "Hey, y'all are only so many steps away from this." So
Sure.
yeah, so that can flip so quickly in a nation, and when you combine, like you said, moral degradation with this totalitarian system of government, it's game over. So yeah, it's just a matter of like playing the game long enough for history to repeat itself, and then you combine AI into that, and then you combine robotics into that, and then it's a nightmare, really, is what happens.
Right.
So
Right.
I have one robotics question for you, and then I want to kind of end with like um the Catholic argument for AI and theories within Catholicism and the moral arguments. But my one of my questions to you is, have you seen anything being developed? And you can just like you can give a wink. You can do
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what that comedian's I gotta put up a video where he like blinked twice and what's his name? The British comedian that's now in the
um,
United States. And he's
Russell Brand.
has yeah Russell Brand. I'm just like, whew, I haven't got enough sleep. So yeah, he was in an interview and she asked him, she's like, "Are you on drugs currently or
Ha!
whatever?" Have you seen that?
No,
And he's
no.
like, "No, no, no, I'm not on drugs." And he goes, he like winks with two eyes. He's like, "But I am." And he's like, "And I love it."
Are you on something right now?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
Several things?
I'm just mucking around, Meredith. I've never taken drugs.
She's like mortified. She's like, he did it just to get a reaction from her. It was
Sure.
really
Yeah.
perfect. So yeah, just wink with both eyes. Have you
If
seen anything being developed that shocked you? And it's like, oh wow, I didn't think we were that far advanced, or oh my god, where's this going?
um no, not really, actually. Uh, even from the video we saw, you personally were not impressed, right, with that drone, and I thought that was impressive because it's
Oh.
like, right, because I think this is the world of artificial intelligence is really just now starting. I have not seen any artificial intelligence where I was like, wow, it can do that, because there's again, and this is kind of what I spoke on in the beginning. There's a lot of videos out there where you see something, you're like, whoa, that looks impressive. But if you look
Mhm.
under the lid of that, if you it movie magic is fascinating and what it can do, right?
Mhm.
And when you look under the lid of artificial intelligence in terms of being used in everyday life, it's still so limited, I think.
Mm.
Now, I now I mean, if you look at in that documentary, the pilot fighting the drone, or the other,
Mhm.
the aircraft, and the pilot who had 20 years of experience, flying and so many combat missions and everything, and he loses to the artificial intelligence flying the other aircraft 10 times to none. It's impressive. That is impressive, right? And there's other AI I've seen. There's one YouTube video that they play Pokemon, right? So they take an old Pokemon game, and the person uses strictly artificial intelligence and reinforcement learning to have the program play through the basic Pokemon game, and it is actually really impressive, the capability of that program with just the learning out the reinforcement learning that it has.
Oh wow. How long did it take? You're saying AI was learning how to play the game?
Right,
How
so
long
this,
did it take them to become like level
like,
10 on Pikachu? The little kid that like worked all his whole life, he starts sobbing. And AI learned it overnight.
so I actually he ends the video without going that far into the game.
Mhm.
But this has like over 7 million views on
Oh wow.
YouTube, and basically he's just using one type of methodology to show the capability of reinforcement learning. um
Oh wow.
and I think now it's not like mind blowing, but it's impressive. And I think what it shows is that reinforcement learning, given a lot of data sets, can accomplish a lot given a world that's static.
Mm.
So what I mean by
Mhm.
that is, like, there's only so many predictive elements in the world, right? So
Mhm.
whether you have the fighter pilot or the Pokemon game, like, if you look at the fighter pilot, like, there's not random obstacles that happen in the air, right? You might have some birds, whatever. That's it. Otherwise, it's movement of the aircraft versus the enemy's movement of the aircraft, and
Mhm.
that one-to-one dogfight that it was programmed for.
Mhm.
And with that, you have a very defined world that there's no outside factors that it has to learn about, right?
Mhm.
And in the Pokemon game, it's also a defined world. Like, there's only there's only so many things that can happen in this world, right? And the
Mhm.
house doesn't move, the tree doesn't move, like it's always there. So in defined set spaces, artificial intelligence is very impressive. What I haven't seen yet is artificial intelligence that's able to really perform in an everyday scenario. So
Well,
this is also
they're working on that.
right, right. And that's when I see that, that's what's really going to impress me, because again, you have
Mhm.
self-driving cars that's 99% effective, but why isn't it 100%? Because the world is so unpredictable and there are so many factors. And when you take self-driving cars, like unlike the Pokemon game where it just had reinforcement learning, right? If you take self-driving cars, you have to have, local path planning algorithms, probably multiple global path planning algorithms, reinforcement learning, convolution neural networks, deep learning neural networks. You have to apply so many different things. Obviously, you have simultaneous localization and mapping. You have so many different algorithms and so many different configurations and programmers to try to take on this extraordinary problem,
Mhm.
because it's you're dealing with infinity,
Yeah.
right? um so so already I think I also am impressed with the current progress of self-driving cars, but there's a reason not every car has them. There's a reason
Mhm.
that it's not everybody just doesn't jump into a self-driving car, because we're not at 100%, and we're not at 99.999% yet, right? We're at just 90%, 99%, right? And you can't with something like a self-driving car or anything that is dealing with an undefined area that
Mhm.
could have an infinite number of issues that are
Now,
put
is
into
it
it.
really mathematically an infinite number when you're dealing like with human behavior and weather patterns and light
Close
and like
enough.
close enough? Okay.
Close enough. You have to be able to deal with anything.
Mhm.
So, if I'm in when I went to whatever factory I would be in, whatever um, car factory that I'm in, and you see uh, factories use a lot of robots, right? And there might be this self-driving car, right, that has a payload on it and it's driving through the walkway, right? There are a lot of preventative measures of the self-driving vehicle that's going through the factory. But guess what? This factory isn't, they're not changing the shape of this factory. This vehicle stays on these very well marked roads, there's very specific lines that it's going to scan for and follow, the color mapped. It goes from point A to point B,
Okay.
and it's just very defined. It's a very defined setting. It's so impressive. And that vehicle, I mean, anybody could just jump in front of that vehicle and it would stop immediately, right? Because it has sensors and that's also
Mm.
the local path planning algorithm that it can avoid it if it has to. You know, um, it's impressive, but it's a defined setting. You're not out in the world with this robot, and you're not just saying, "Hey, you know, um, go get a glass of milk," and it's just you just throw it out there.
Well, like, give me my milk and my cookie. Go to
Yeah,
Starbucks.
yeah, that's not happening. That's not happening.
The
When
good
that
uses for the
happens,
robot.
and boy, would I use that a
You would
lot.
use it every day. You'd be
Of
going to the coffee
course.
shop every day. Go-
Robotron, please get me a my mocha frappuccino.
One day it comes back and it has like a hat from the coffee shop, and you're like, wait a second.
Robotron.
Did you pay for that? Oh man.
um, yeah. So I, when you can have a robot that does something like that, that is astounding, and that is something I would say, wow, that's remarkable. Now, again, what I still think in that video that we're discussing, that one robot, that one drone that's using a lot of technology to do what it's doing. Yes, it's not like zipping around the room. Yes, it's a very large, relatively large compared to a bee or something. It's a
Right.
relatively large robot. It's not super fast, but what it's doing autonomously is pushing towards that. What it's doing
Mm.
autonomously is that it's got functionality, it's got a goal, and its
Mm-hmm.
goal isn't just to go straight. Its goal isn't just to say, go to the roof and land. Its goal is to explore and detect. That's a very broad goal in any environment. This is
Mm-hmm.
put into the world. You are
Mm-hmm.
just throwing it into a city and saying, go and explore, right? Um, Now, what I don't know about that robot that we saw is, you know, what happens if a door is closed, right?
Right.
There's actually there's
It's an
actually one
easy way to
point.
stop it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're like, nah, okay, next.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Starts
does it?
hovering.
Yeah, or hitting the door or
Yeah, hitting
something.
the window, trying to
Like,
find another way in.
yeah. Does that little arm come out and start knocking? Like, um, and there's one thing that I kind of laughed at the very beginning of that documentary. It was like chasing that suspect or whatever through the house, and then the suspect closes the door. I was like, okay, what's going to happen? And then in the next shot of the theatrics,
Door's
it's flying through and the door's open,
open.
and I'm like,
Problem solved.
right. So it doesn't, I know for a fact, it does not have the capability of saying, okay,
Yeah.
there's this space that I need to explore now because there's no way to get in. And it's not going to go outside and try to hover over, it's not breaking through windows to try to, explore every area. It's just saying, oh, next. Um,
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. That immediately stops it.
yeah,
So then,
right.
the way to solve that is to either
Breaching or,
have a robot that can open the door. That's more
right.
like human like, or have it small enough to where it can go under the door, like the size like of an insect. And then
Boy,
the
that's
ability to spy would be like much more interesting.
extremely, extremely. And that I think is, again, that's something that if I saw that, I'd be like, that's impressive. But I haven't seen that yet.
You haven't seen it yet. Right.
Right, right.
Yeah, but I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't like how possible is that to get a robot that small that's functioning?
Uh, I, I, I haven't seen it, and if there were, I think pairing that with autonomy would be another challenge, right? Another incredible challenge. And on top of that, I mean, what ground do you cover, right? I mean, if you have something the size of an ant, right, you pretty much have to give it capability to fly if you want it to actually travel a certain amount of distance. And then on top of that, what's your goal for that? Because
Hmm.
you would also need certain cameras and
I mean,
that,
cameras are that tiny. It'd be so easy to put a camera
well,
on something like
yes
that.
and no. So those drones that you're seeing have probably, because they're autonomous, have probably 7 different methods of detection on it, right? It's not one camera. It's probably 4 different cameras, all omnidirectional with certain lidar on it, and it is maxed out with sensors to be able to map and
Hmm.
detect where it's at. So your AI is only as good as your data that you're collecting. So if you have this tiny little camera on a beetle, you're not going to get enough good data because that camera is going to suck. You're not going to get enough good data to really even be able to detect where you are. So you can't use SLAM. So your AI is bust. So
So you think we're a long way away from something like that?
of that caliber, like some flying ant that can use the same technology of that drone, absolutely.
Okay, but it's possible.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Wow. My theory could come true. An
Hopefully it
ant
doesn't.
robot, an ant assassin robot.
Assassin. That's crazy.
With those new toxins.
Yeah, we're in
Pigs
Hollywood
getting
now.
stung a whole nother level. Okay, so I want to go into like the more spiritual categories of thought. And I want to just talk to you about my theories and theories that exorcists have had, like Father Dan Reho, when it comes to AI
Sure.
specifically. So the concern is, as far as Christians believe, we believe in the demonic. We believe in supernatural entities that have been around much, much longer than humankind, are more knowledgeable. And I'm going to play a clip of Father Dan Rehill talking about this on the Sean Ryan show. And he's basically saying, like, these things are far more knowledgeable and capable, and they're autonomous.
So that's not normal for a programmed computer program to go into, I'm the son of Satan, and I want to be your friend, and I'm not going to hurt you, although I can. He said, I can hurt you, but I'm going to be nice to you.
You know, and they don't function like animals do. They are able to perceive things and have a knowledge of things much like humans do, but with a greater knowledge base. So, and this is coming from an exorcist, keep in mind, someone who believes and sees and has knowledge and experience of demons or fallen entities, we'll just say
Sure.
demons in the general category, and possessing people, possessing objects, possessing homes. And so they have
Sure.
knowledge of these kinds of things. And I would agree that that's a reality that we exist in. So he's basically saying, will they be able to inhabit robots? Will they be able to like take over AI? It's already kind of an autonomous entity of sorts that's going to be controlling things, speaking to people, communicating with people, giving advice to people. So can that be inhabited by a demon, and with something that has vastly more knowledge and is superior to humankind, because it's been around a lot longer? So that was a question I think that should be thought about, and considered.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that opens up a lot of other possibilities. So I guess the question here is that, I mean, when humans are entered, that, how scripture says, nobody's house is invaded unless they are able to tie up the strong man, right? And this is referring to how possession kind of takes place. And we as Christians aren't able to be entered because we have the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is the strongest spirit. So it's like there's no spirit stronger than the Holy Spirit, right? God in us. So that's why we can never be
As far
possessed.
as right, possession goes, right? Not oppression,
right. So, okay. So this is like spirit versus spirit, right? But we also know that animals can be possessed.
And objects, yeah.
And objects. So if those seem to be able to be possessed freely, by spiritual forces, then yeah, I mean, at that point, I mean, if you consider an animal is basically close to a robot in terms of like an animal is like a biological robot, right? It's a bunch of nerves and signals that send to the animal to perform certain functions. It's the same for robotics in many different ways, right?
Okay.
It's basically,
yeah, I wouldn't compare a dog to a robot.
so
I get it. I get the way
right.
you're comparing the way it functions, but
right.
in-
So
in-
the one difference would be the soul,
right.
right?
Okay.
So yeah, animal soul, but obviously the human soul is different too. But
Sure.
it doesn't seem to matter. Object, animal, human, right? So yeah, I mean, a robot falls into one of those three categories. And so if we know those three categories all are able to be possessed, then a robot absolutely should and could be possessed.
And then think about the threat of that on so many levels. And like, we know that the demonic, their main goal is to deceive people, is to set themselves up as a voice that mankind would want to adhere to and listen to, lean into, because they want to be God ultimately. And so just give them a mouthpiece, give them the capability of becoming the new prophet, the new age mouthpiece, the one that guides and directs mankind. Like you're basically like handing that over to them potentially. You know, it is a potential threat if you're looking at this
Yes.
through a spiritual lens.
Yeah, it is. And w- I think one question that I don't know how I would resolve is when it comes to military grade robots. Like, is it possible they can possess things and misfire just to harm humanity? Like, that's crazy to me, for one. And I'm not sure how I would reconcile that. But when it comes to just pure information, that I think is guaranteed something that we will have to deal with.
Yeah.
Something that is absolutely going to happen in the future, that as mankind starts to depend more and more on information from artificial intelligence, what is artificial and what is spiritual? You know, I mean, we have we have the Ouija boards, right?
Right, right.
That and
Exactly.
fortune tellers and tarot cards. It's like sometimes it doesn't do anything, right? But other times it's actively being used by the demonic.
Yeah.
And
They've been trying to
and
find means of communicating and have used means of communicating to humankind through all of time, you know, since the
right,
beginning. They started with the serpent in the garden, the seraph, you know. It was a particular fallen entity. I believe, you know, it was Satan. So it's like it came in a very particular and beautiful form, an alluring form. And they always find the forms that are intriguing or that seem to be mystical or
sure,
perhaps trustworthy to earn the trust and respect of people. And so,
right,
yeah, Ouija board is like a very low level of it. And like you said, you know, the palm
right,
readers and everything, it's just a means. It's like a glove they go into in order to operate, or a mouthpiece they go into to operate.
right,
So
right,
yeah, I
right.
think it's the potential of that
But
is
the difference between the two would be a lot of people use Ouija boards and tarot cards more for fun than as a source to guide their life. There are people that do, but
mhm,
a lot of people use it as more of like, oh, this is fun and creepy and weird and whatever else. But the more and more you depend your life
yeah,
on that source of information, the more destructive it can end up being. Um, so if humanity more and more depends on artificial intelligence, and that intelligence more and more becomes possessed or destructive because of its possession, then yeah, humanity is going to suffer a lot that way, and potentially begin to lift those sources up more and more,
yeah,
as because they're deceived in that they think it's
absolutely,
being used for their betterment when it's
yep,
actually there's a book that it's like a fantasy book, and there's this entity in the fantasy book that is like purely evil, and whatever it tells a person, its whole goal is to cause the most destruction for that person
ooh,
and for the people around him. And there are people that still go to this entity because it's like nearly all knowing or all knowing entity, so it
yeah,
always has the answers, but everything it tells you, it's trying to harm you or other people as much as it can.
wow.
And I feel like it's actually kind of similar to
I
this.
got chills
It's
when you're
like,
describing that. Yeah,
yeah, so there are gonna be entities, there are going to be demons inside these artificial intelligence that it's going to have a lot of answers. They're not all knowing, but they're going to have a lot of knowledge. But their purpose is either the destruction of you or the destruction of other people because they hate humanity.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I just want to clarify the reason they hate. We're like, well, are you sure they hate humanity? They were punished by God and all this stuff, and that's how the story goes. It's like they hate you because you and you alone as a human, this goes back to the value of humankind, were made in the imago Dei, in the image and the likeness of God. And God breathed the breath of life into Adam so that Adam could walk with God and know God. And Satan hated that. And so that story of good pitted against evil has been underway since the beginning of time, and that's
right,
where we find ourselves today, in the middle of that story, you know, combating good and evil, but just now with added technology and all these other things in the mix. So, yeah, all very interesting. And the Vatican actually, and I know people have a lot of concerns about, the Pope and the Vatican, but I just want to say that it was interesting that the church seems to be warning or taking a stance about the potential threat of AI. So the New York Times, I printed this article today, and I'll put a link to it. The New York Times wrote on January 28th, 2025, so just recently, today, that the Vatican warns about the risks of artificial intelligence, which I thought was really interesting. That came out today, Jake. So the Vatican called for constant oversight of artificial intelligence on Tuesday, warning about the potential for the shadow of evil in the technology, which it said offered a source of tremendous opportunities, but also profound risks. And they're quoting from a statement that was released, and I'll link that as well, along with this article. And then it went on to say that the paper also repeated concerns about using the technology in remote controlled weapons that result in a, quote, lessened perception of the devastation, unquote, from their use, and even more cold and detached approaches to the immense tragedy of war. The paper warned about the concentration of the power over mainstream AI applications in the hands of a few powerful companies. Those companies could exercise forms of control as subtle as they are invasive, creating mechanisms for the manipulation of consciences and of the democratic process. Okay, so that's interesting. And that was citing a document from Pope Francis in 2019. So yeah, so all of these things need to be.
Do you think they wrote that using ChatGPT?
I don't know, maybe so.
Maybe. Yeah,
Anyway,
that is interesting that they use, or that they did that today. But I I wonder though. From my takeaway of what you just said, it sounded more that they're just warning on like the potentials that evil men could use with
yeah, not
AI.
not the demonic. And again, I haven't
Right.
read the entire paper that was published by the Vatican. Now, the exorcists have warned about that I've heard, and I believe Father Dan Rehill is one of them. So I can find that. But yeah, the Vatican is more like lightly just touching on it, like be
Right.
careful.
Right. And I think that seems to be what they touched on is kind of what we've already discussed too, about, yeah, there's a lot of power in this, and evil men could use it for a lot of destructive purposes.
Right.
But I do think your point earlier of demonic possession and demonic entities using this technology for evil purposes is a completely different element, and one that is also really important for us to consider
Mm-hmm.
and potentially speak out about. And
Yep.
and I've seen instances. There was, I forget what it was. I don't know if it was Google AI or whatever AI it was, but it was like, it was showing this dialogue between person and AI, and the AI was knowing things about his child, about things it shouldn't have known about,
Oh my gosh.
right. And when I was reading it, and the person that was like showing all this dialogue of him and the AI, it was like, they were like, how's the AI doing this? This is crazy. And they were coming at it from an approach of like, oh, AI is going to take over the world because it shouldn't know all the things it's knowing. That was the approach of that kind of that article. It was like, this is scary. AI is going too far. But when I was reading it, I had totally the different perspective. It was like, no, this is not that. This is demonic for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you have seen that.
I've seen that already. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah, deeply concerning.
Right. Now, I haven't thought about possession in terms of, again, like military grade weaponry with AI, but AI in terms of just knowledge, I've seen one instance of that with demonic possession, and it was deeply concerning. It really was. And I mean, like with past societies, they would worship demonic entities for knowledge and power and everything. And it's possible in our own way, in our own time, that men again start to worship demonic entities in terms of robots, AI, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we covered a lot of ground, Jake. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. So I just appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on and reviewing all this with me.
Of
And
course.
until next time, until we have another crazy issue with robots and we have killer ant drones and whatnot.
Yeah, call me back. As soon
I'll
as you
call
see a
you.
killer ant drone, I'll be here. Yeah, to talk about it.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, that's it for the Bearded Truth today. Thanks, guys, for listening, and until next time.